Good afternoon. Been informed that our president had some medical procedures earlier today, and there's a real possibility that he will not be here, so I have the distinguished pleasure of chairing this meeting, and distinguished is in quotation marks. This is a special city council meeting and public hearing for the purpose of adopting tentative millage rates for the city and the downtown improvement district for 2012, and the tentative budgets for the city and the downtown improvement board, and a budget for the CRA and East Side TIFs district for the fiscal year 2013. There is a distinct procedural aspect that we have to follow, so we are going to try to ensure that we do that. The first substantive issue discussed must be the percentage increase over the rollback rate necessary to fund the budget, if any, and the specific purposes for which ad valorem tax revenue are being increased. The rollback rate is the millage rate which would be sufficient to provide the same ad valorem tax revenue as was levied during the prior year. The proposed tentative millage rate of 4.2895 mills for the city and 2.0000 mills for the downtown improvement district constitute a 1.565 percentage decrease of property taxes below the aggregate rollback rates, which is 4.4058 mills. The rollback rate is the millage rates which, exclusive of new construction, addition to structures, deletions, increases in the value of improvements that have undergone a substantial rehabilitation, which increases the assessed value of such improvements by at least 100%, and property added due to geographical boundary changes, will provide the same ad valorem tax revenue as were levied during the prior year. Now, the mayor's staff will explain the reason for the proposed decrease over the rollback rate. So, Mr. Barker, please.
Yes, sir. I have a statement to read in response to that question. The reason for the proposed decrease over the rollback rate is due primarily to the declining property values, along with the passage of Amendment 1 that allows for portability, as well as the property tax reform state legislation requiring all cities and counties to calculate a maximum millage levy which adjusts the rollback rate for growth in per capita Florida personal income. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Madam Clerk, resolution number 3412.
Item 1 is resolution number 34-12, a resolution to be entitled, a resolution tentatively levying an ad valorem property tax for the city of Pensacola, including the downtown improvement district for 2012, providing an effective date.
Move the approval.
Second.
Okay, are there any comments from the public? Council?
I have my light on. Am I the only one?
Beg pardon?
I have my light on. I don't know if anyone else can speak. Speak down. Yeah.
Is it on? Oh, thank you. Okay. Councilwoman DeWeese?
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. And I had some questions on the DIB budget as presented. Is there anyone here that can answer those questions?
Mr.
No, sir, I don't see anyone from the DIB, but if you would like to ask, is it on the budget or the millage rate?
The budget, so I don't know if passing the millage rate and passing everything, it's contingent on that being approved.
If the resolution for the millage is separate from the budget resolution.
Okay,
Yeah,
as long as I have a
yeah.
chance to address those.
That would be under.
That was actually number 2 that we.
3, okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions? Please vote. Approved unanimously. For the record, we'll show that President Hall is absent and Councilperson Johnson. Thank you. Okay. Item number 2, Madam Clerk, resolution number 3512.
Item number 2 is resolution number 35-12, a resolution to be entitled, a resolution adopting a tentative budget for the city of Pensacola for the fiscal year beginning October 1, 2012, making tentative appropriations for the payment of the expenses of the city government and all departments thereof, and for the payment on account of the bonded indebtedness of the city for the fiscal year beginning October 1, 2011, providing an effective date.
Move the approval.
Second.
Probably move in second. Before we go any further, our attorney, you like this?
Yes, sir. If I
Mr.
could, Madam Clerk, where it speaks about the bonded indebtedness, that should be October 1st, 2012.
Okay.
Should be October 1st, 2012.
Yeah, both dates should be October 1st, 2012.
Got you.
Okay.
Mr. Attorney, your light was on. Okay, Councilwoman Myers.
Yes. I have several comments. It was my understanding that we were going to have another meeting to obtain more information from outside funding sources. That meeting never took place. I have a problem with not having that information. I have concerns about several of the outside funding sources and that we're funding, or outside agencies, and I'm just wondering why that meeting never took place.
Mr. Barker.
Yes, sir. Mr. Vice President and Councilwoman, if that discussion was as part of the workshop, that was really a committee of the whole meeting, and if you recall that there was no action taken at that meeting. It died in committee, so it was never reported out of committee. So if you would like to discuss those things, that would have to be done with another motion of council. But if you recall, when we finished the 16 hours of those meetings over the 2 days, that it did not pass the motion.
I don't recall making, that there was a motion. I thought that we agreed that we would have the outside agencies present additional material, and I feel uncomfortable voting to approve this budget when I haven't heard from those outside agencies. So that's one thing. The other thing that bothers me is that we had 2 days of workshops, and we sat through a bunch of PowerPoints that I felt were not necessary. Those PowerPoints should have been sent to us in advance so that we could have spent our time talking and discussing the budget. So I'm going to have some problems approving this budget. The other thing I wanted to ask you, Mr. Barker, if I may, on page 11 of the resolution having to do with the budget, under Economic Development Incentive General Fund, can you explain that? What is that?
Yes, ma'am.
I know we had some discussion about it, but nothing was ever resolved in terms of us understanding, or my understanding of what it is.
Yes, ma'am, I'll be glad to do it. This is the Economic Development Incentive Fund that the mayor had mentioned in his budget message, and we have budgeted revenues of a total of $1 million and expenditures of $1 million for that fund. It is a new fund, and it is part of the general fund. If you recall, in the committee of the whole meeting where we went over the budget, I had mentioned that we would treat it like the Tree Planting Trust Fund, which is really part of the general fund, but we report out separately. So this is shown separately, just like on page 10, the Tree Planting Trust Fund is. And those are the revenues here. Some questions had come in on this fund as it relates to what the revenue sources are. These would be all new revenue sources that we have not had in the past and that we anticipate to come in. A question came in concerning the miscellaneous revenue of $300,000, and it is for other unidentified leases and revenue that may come in the future. The traffic fines, if you recall, Mr. Garza gave a presentation on red light cameras. A decision has not been made on that from council yet, but these would be new traffic fines, not existing traffic fines that are being used to fund the general fund. So all these sources are new revenues and would be spent on incentives, and that plan and would come back to council for them to review. If you recall, there were some discussions at the meeting as to exactly what these funds were going to be used for, how they were going to be expended, and that type of thing. And so that will be coming back to council so that they can see what those funds would be spent before any funds are expended from this fund, any dollars are expended.
Okay, I know we have a second reading on this budget, so between now and the second reading, I think it would be prudent for council to ask in advance what these incentives are going to be. What are they going to look like? What type of incentives are we giving? This is $1 million, and who are we giving them to? What's the criteria? I don't think it's prudent just to say we're going to give $1 million in incentives, and we're asked to approve it, but we don't know what we're approving it for. And I think that would be a dereliction of duty not to find out exactly what the plan is for using that $1 million. I assume it's some type of revolving fund that...
The intent is exactly what you have stated, that the criteria would come back to City Council for their review. This is just the appropriation of the dollars, but as I just mentioned, before anything's expended from these dollars, it would come back to council.
Okay.
I agree with Councilwoman Myers, and I think it's incumbent that if any council person has a question, I would hope that they would try to get it cleared up prior to coming to the meeting, and then they will have some understanding, and they're not saying they can't bring it up at the next meeting, but we've had this budget for some time now, and you would think that any issues regarding outside agents or all those kind of things, if you had some questions about them, they very well might could have been addressed and where we could have a clear understanding of it. Councilwoman Pratt.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I just wanted to have a couple things to say, but first I wanted to get clarification from Mr. Barker. You just said that before any of the money from the Economic Development Fund is expended, you will come to us for policy on how that money is expended, or will you just come for approval of any expenditure?
No, ma'am. There would be criteria set, and we would bring that criteria forward to council at that time.
Because I have spent some time agonizing about that Economic Development Fund. I think we all support economic development. We've supported it in a lot of ways, but the lack of accountability disturbs me. I am reminded of the recent expenditure in Okaloosa County for marketing, and I recall it at our budget workshop committee of the whole. Mr. Barker said that this fund could be spent for marketing or advertising properties or whatever without coming to council. In Okaloosa, they spent $700,000 on marketing by buying a yacht, and if something like that could happen without, we're giving a blank check, I think that that's a real concern. So I am glad to hear that nothing will be spent until the council has approved a criteria system for how it will be spent. I have two other concerns. They've bothered me for a while. The first is the pension issue. I think we all are excited by the progress being made on reforming the pensions, but I'm concerned that we're not budgeting for what we could have in costs for, we all know that we're sort of trading short-term gain to the unions for long-term pension reform, and we see in our agenda for next week that there's costs associated with the units we've already bargained with, and I think we should be anticipating costs in those others. And I think that if our budget is our attempt at setting policy for the year, then we should, if our policy and our plan for the year is to deal with this, I think we should have set aside funds for that. If we don't, we're saying to the mayor, okay, we want you to negotiate pension reform, but you can't spend more on short-term things than we're going to get in actuarial savings. And I think I'd like for him to have as many tools at his disposal to do that. And so I think that it's unfortunate, and I understand the timing of everything, but I think it would have been prudent to include funds for that in this budget. And I think that in looking at it, we should talk about our priorities, and if pensions are our priorities, and I think they are. And then on the second concern, where is that money going to come from ultimately? And there's a part of the budget that I think is not necessarily one of our priorities, which is the advertising contract, which is quite large. I think we all understand that our enterprises need to advertise, and there's money for advertising throughout the budget. But the things I've seen that this firm has done, including a lot of advertising for beach hotels and the Air Museum, and I think, wait, as Councilman Hall often reminds us, wait, we're city residents, but we're also county residents. Why are we as city residents advertising the county? And so if this budget is reflecting our priorities, we're saying that we prefer advertising the beach over pension reform, and I think that is not what this council believes. I'm trying to get a little clearer on what we think the pension costs could be, and I might bring some information at the next meeting. And I hope that everyone will think about what our priorities are in this budget. Thank you.
Mr. Barker.
Yes, ma'am. If I could, Dr. Pratt, just for clarification of the public on a couple of those issues that you mentioned. As you're well aware, as part of the whole pension reform issue, it has been a difficult issue for staff to negotiate and that type of thing, and we do have 2 contracts on the agenda for council to consider. For those items that happen during the year, and I think council has seen that probably about 10 or 15 times this year, if additional appropriations or dollars are needed, we bring that attached to the agenda item with a special resolution. We were holding them all to the end or mid-year or something like that, but when the items come forward, and certainly that's how I intend on bringing back any dollars that may be needed because of the pension reform and issues. It would have been very nice, I've got to agree with you, to have all the negotiations done and completed in time for the budget process, but sometimes those things just don't happen, and they did not happen this time, and things come up during the year that appropriations are needed for, so there is a process set forth that those can be dealt with in that time frame, and when they don't happen where they fit into the budget, that's what we do. We bring them back during the year for council review and consideration.
Okay. Councilman Gerald.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I wanted to make some comments as it relates to outside agency funding. And as you all may recall, that discussion developed out of another discussion when one outside agency was singled out to show cause and accountability for their spending and some of the other things that they were doing. And as stated by Mr. Barker, no action was taken, and however, that was kind of a committee of the whole. I do believe that the council has a right and a responsibility to insist upon reports that give us accountability for the outside agency funding, those who will make the request and those who are spending the dollars, to provide us with accountability of what's going on within those agencies. And I believe that in the next committee of the whole meeting, if we get that on the agenda, that would be the appropriate time to take some action so that we demand, if you will, reports and accountability from all of the agencies, not just the one that was singled out at that meeting. We want to know exactly what they're doing with the taxpayers, and we have a fiduciary responsibility to know that. And as I indicated, we have a right and a responsibility to take care, to address this in the next committee of the whole meeting so that we can take the action and put all of them on notice that we will, on a yearly basis, and even though Yvette did provide us with some reports during the meeting of the ones that we were particularly concerned about, but it is my belief that they should all show some accountability and responsibility in their spending and the actions that they're taking with taxpayer dollars. Thank you.
Mr. Barker.
Yes, sir. If I could just respond to that for the citizens involved too, and for council that may not be aware, all of our outside agencies, the majority of those sign a miscellaneous appropriation agreement each year, and there is a budget that shows what they intend to spend it on, and there is, as they expend the funds, records that are submitted to my office before payment is made for those funds. If council would like those sent to council on a quarterly basis or part of my quarterly reports or something like that, we can certainly attach those if council would want to see them. But I didn't want to leave the impression with the citizens that there is no accountability, because there are agreements that are signed and based on what council approves in the budget, and there is records that show what the funds were expended on. And as you're aware, several of them, I can think of the chamber comes in and actually gives a presentation a couple of times a year to let you know what they're doing with the funds and that type of thing. But certainly if council would like that, those are available for us to make part of the quarterly reports.
And I thank you, Dick, for those comments, because my concern and issue was to clear up the concerns that Ms. Myers here had indicated. And I too did not want the public to think that we did not get reports. And I recall saying to, I believe it was Yvette, when those reports started coming, and I reminded myself of be careful what you ask for. And there were mounds of information coming in a rather rapid fashion. And as I said, you be careful what you ask for, but those reports do come to us. It's just a matter of sitting down and reading them and analyzing and looking for the answers to the question that one may have. But if that's something that has been cleared up and we don't have to do that again, and as a matter of fact, you would be able to request a specific report if you desire to do so.
Yes, sir.
With one of the agencies that's on that list.
Yes,
but we did begin to receive it, and it was indeed a mound of information about the agencies. But what really occurred, as I indicated earlier, was that one agency was singled out and discussed, and it was my opinion that we should discuss and look at all of them versus pulling one out of the group and say, well, what are they doing? So if it is in fact in place that we do get those reports, we do get that information, I'm comfortable with that. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you. Councilwoman DeWeese.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I have a document here from the Council of Neighborhood Association Presidents that I'd like to read into the record. And I'm not quite sure how this would happen because it's an official request from that group that was actually voted on by their membership. And you may remember during the Boyd Forum at our committee meeting, and also I believe Ms. McKnight came to this meeting, to this forum on a Thursday evening. And it has to do with the Neighborhood Enhancement Program itemized expenses, that they've only spent about $20,000 of a total of $142,000 that was allocated. And they're simply requesting that the remainder from the fiscal year 2012 budget be carried over into the improvements, capital improvements budget for park improvements. They're very concerned about the lack of funds in capital improvements. So I guess we'll need clarification from Mr. Barker if this is in fact possible to carry over from that fund to the capital improvements and then have it earmarked for park improvements. And if I need to read her email into the record, I'm happy to do that.
Thank you. I do recall that request, and I think I read something in that regard. I don't feel that we need to take any sort of necessary formal action as it relates to that request. I would suspect that it would go through our normal procedural aspect to ensure that whatever park improvements that are desired, that it would take place. I'm concerned about the overall parks, if you will, and who's going to make the judgment as to which park, et cetera. So I have some concerns, personally, I have some concerns regarding that, and I'm not certain all of the neighborhood groups, for some reasons, are not included in that group.
Well, it's not a direct allocation to a specific project. It's just saying whatever is left over from that line item in the budget for this year be carried over to capital improvements. So my main question is certainly to acknowledge their request, but ask if it in fact can be allocated from one line item over to the capital improvements budget, since that's LOST dollars and such.
Mr. Barker, would you care to respond to?
I will. I'll be glad to take that and look at it. I don't recall seeing it before, but there are items, all the PCIP money has been, since the program has started, has been carried forward from one year to the other, usually used on PCIP. So it is not unusual that dollars would be carried over for the use that was intended into the next year. I'll read over it and
Okay.
be glad to discuss it with the mayor and get back with you on the issue that they're specifically issuing.
Okay. And I do have some questions and statements to make. Just on page 38 on our briefing, there is a misspelled of carpenters. It's cap renters on page 38. I'm just sorry, that's my editing first that I see. It's page 38 on the second time that Carpenter's Creek is stated. And I did see Ms. Crawford come in. I do have a question, and not really a question, but a concern, and I'd already talked to her about this on page 47, the air carrier landing fees. We have had a substantial increase in that, and she has assured me that that's not going to affect our rating. You know, we've suffered 2 reductions in our rating, with obvious concerns about being able to manage and cover debt service. So I just wanted to bring that up as a concern, and if there's any clarification that could be given on the record. I know that we have a first-class operation out there, so I'm not questioning the logic. I just want to hear, again, that we're going to be okay there because we've worked so hard on that airport. And also, I took a look at the insurance retention fund, and I'm concerned about that because there's been several increases in that, and the logic given would be that it would be a decrease, and that is in fact not happening. I did want to be on the record about my concerns about the insurance retention fund. Also, I know that I brought up a great deal of concern for MIS. The increase in the cost for MIS is 50% more than it has been in years past, and it is a direct result of the allocation of marketing dollars into that. I don't think it's a department anymore. I'm not sure of the name of it now, but anyway. I wanted to tag on to this concern about the Economic Development Fund that Ms. Myers has brought up.
Could I interrupt you a minute?
Certainly.
You raised 4 questions. Would you like a response?
Just the question for Ms. Crawford, but she can come in a little bit.
Okay, and then you raised about...
Just a statement.
Oh, okay.
I'll let you know when, so it's just Ms. Crawford that I need to hear from right now. But my concern about the Economic Development Fund and the absence of policy, accounting controls, and procedures, I actually brought that up with regard to the Zimmerman advertising account as well because of what had happened in Okaloosa County and the need for those controls and, you know, the procedures for funding things within those two. And what I feel would be prudent, and if we're not able to do that today, maybe between now and the second reading and second approval of the budget, that we put language in place, not necessarily a change in this Economic Development Fund, because it's been very well explained by Mr. Barker, and I am on board with economic development, and I simply feel that it is urgent that we have policy in place. Any other government entity, if you look around us, within the state of Florida, in the region, at any level, not just the cities, but the counties, and even the state is accountable for this this sort of process to be defined, and we are falling way short if we do not put policy in place. So I can either make a motion that we have that language in place before the next meeting, or I would not be able to support approving the budget today, but it be subject to that language being put in place. And as far as the other two things I have, they may need to be motions made, so I'll stop at this point and ask you how you'd like to dispose of the Economic Development Fund concern. Would you like for me to make a motion at this point to add the policy and procedures for how this fund will be used? I know that it'll be brought back to council, but it needs to be articulated, just like any other process that the mayor and his staff would be going through.
Well, economic development is an animal that you really don't know what you're going to get until you really work toward it, for one thing. But Mr. Barker, would you care to respond to that?
Yes, sir, and Councilwoman DeWeese, I just want to assure you that no expenditures will be made from that fund. I've talked with the mayor's office about that. We have looked at criteria from other cities, counties, as to what they do, and we have been working on criteria for that to bring to the city council. If you feel comfortable enough, because nothing happens until really the second public hearing, we will try to get you our draft information out anyhow that we have gathered for you to look at and review. And I can't promise it'll be on an agenda, but at least we can get you our working papers at what we're looking at right now.
Okay, because I do think it's urgent that it be part of the budget. As Dr. Pratt said, if we're setting policy for the year and we don't take this action, then we own the outcome on that one, and we may have a boat or a house or something to deal with at that point, and we can't risk that. So I will wait then. I will not make a motion, Mr. Vice President. I'll just await that information before the next hearing.
Okay, sir.
My next concern is with the FEMA funds that are being allocated to the city. I had sent an email out immediately upon hearing of that because I had had a conversation with the mayor's staff, someone on the mayor's staff, about that being pursued directly for the rebuild of Fire Station 3 or the refurbishment of Fire Station 3. And that came into question, but in fact the damage for Fire Station 3 started with Ivan, just as Station 6 had, and was to be repaired and never was. So I would like to make certain, because it is part of the budget that Firehouse 3 needs to be rebuilt, that the FEMA funds, that council direct those FEMA funds to be allocated to Fire Station 3. So again, it's not a change in dollar amounts, it's simply a statement of this council that those FEMA funds be used for Fire Station 3. And I'm able to make a motion at this time if you would like for me to.
Mr. Barker, would you like to respond to this?
Yes, I'd like to explain a few things about the FEMA funds. First of all, the FEMA funds will not be expended to appropriated, and certainly not expended and appropriated until council approves the resolution for that. We're still working through several PWs. I know it seems like a long time. The project reports from FEMA. Okay. And currently there is an issue with another major project that FEMA is holding all funds, even though we've been granted dollars for the debris. There's an offsetting negative that they say that they need more explanation on before those funds are released. So we don't even have those funds yet. But
okay.
Certainly I just want to assure you that the funds will not be expended until appropriated by council.
Okay, because it was told to me that those FEMA funds were already being used for improvements at City Hall, that they had been allocated. So I just want to make sure that council makes that ultimate decision.
There have been, those dollars have not been received by the city. That's a recent occurrence. They're being held up. I don't know that the plan is not for City Hall. I'm not aware of that, but at any rate, they will not be expended until appropriated by City Council.
Wonderful, thank you.
There is a specific item in the budget addressing Fire Station number 3, am I correct?
It's just unfunded. There aren't any funds left in the capital improvements plan until 2017. It's spent. So I'm just trying to ensure that if funds do become available from FEMA, that they be directed towards Station 3. But I won't make a motion. I've heard Mr. Barker on the record explain it to me, and I'm fine with that.
Thank you.
So my final concern is the Zimmerman advertising contract and the expense that the city is going to. I took some time to review the actual pitch that they had done, their 30 or 45 minutes, I guess it was. And, you know, they had promised several things that I don't feel are happening, and I'm very concerned. I had sent an email to Mr. Barker through Mr. Reynolds, of course, and asked about the accounting controls and procedures. Again, we have a huge expenditure with no controls in place, and I was told that it would be one individual in the MIS department that will be in charge of that account, the expenditures for it, the approval of them, and that those need to come to council as well. So it's the same thing. I'm not going to go back through it with the Economic Development Fund, that we need those accounting controls and procedures and our policy as council in place if we were to approve that. Some of the things I'm concerned about is that we already spend $250,000 with the chamber, who is marketing our area, and then we have a new economic development fund of $1 million, and we're being asked to spend even more on top of that to market the new brand of Pensacola. Part of the presentation I wanted council to be aware of is that this has never been done before in the manner that Zimmerman is trying to market the city of Pensacola. It's their first try at this, based on what they said in the presentation. They also talked about CEO branding, that they're branding the mayor, which concerns me because the mayor is the mayor for 4 years, and the city has been the city for 453 years, and it's a great deal of history to rely on in branding our city and not one individual. I just am not, convinced that this expense is justified. It was stated in the presentation that return on investment is everything, and I have not seen the reports. They said that they would attach any expenditure, would explain return on investment. They talked about their bag of tricks and that they were Houdinis and they could manipulate the situation and spin, and I was very concerned. I think we're stepping out a bit too far in trying to market ourselves in this manner. I know the enterprises need to market, the airport, our port, and our gas service, but I can't support the budget as it stands with that amount in there. So I'm willing to make a motion at this time to remove the cost allocations to all departments for the Zimmerman Agency branding contract. And then I would be able to support the budget. So I'm making that motion at this time to remove the Zimmerman Agency funding.
Second.
Okay, before we go through with that motion, has a contract been signed and sealed with this particular agency?
Yes, sir, Mr. Vice President. The contract has been signed in the FY13 budget for council's information and the public's information. In their base contract is $474,000, and in their what we call non-base, if they're doing work for ESP or the port or airport, there is $744,800. So those are direct items that they would have, or promotions that they have, or that type of thing that they need advertised for. And then the total amount that we have budgeted this year is $1.2 million. As you're aware, in the history is we've always had advertising as part of the budget in the various departments, and over the last several years, that advertising, depending on what's going on, has increased or decreased with that agency. And I do agree that with Mr. Weiss, that she is correct. This is something new that we're looking at, a new program that we're looking at, a new way of handling it to see if the efficiencies are there in this new contract. It has not been handled that way since I've been with the city, but I do want to assure council that each individual department who has the money identified in their department approve their various department. The information technology individual who does the base contract is managing a total of about $170,000 of the $1.2 million contract. So there are various individuals within the city that review that, and of course, before any expenditures are made, those come through my office and are reviewed by my staff before that they are paid. But the base contract's $474,000. $100,000 of that is in the general fund. 102 is with ESP, 30,000 is with the port, 102 is with airport, and MIS, which is the remaining part of the base contract, or information technology, is $140,000. The rest are for specific items that may come up during the year that those individual departments want to advertise for.
Thank you. We have at least 3 councilpersons who would like to speak on this. Councilwoman Myers,
I'll let the other lights go first. You can call on me last, if you don't mind.
you want to come in on the tail end?
Well, I might change my mind between now and what somebody else has to say.
Councilman Gerald.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. And I have 2 questions. One, I would hate to see the budget not go forward based on that one concern, and that's number one. And number 2, I would like to know where that leaves us, or is there an opportunity to address Ms. DeWeese's concerns, to reassure her that her concerns will be addressed, and in that way the budget can move forward. And I guess Mr. Barker would be the one to respond to that, to let us know, first of all, where would that leave us, because if we were to pull it out, and would that indicate that we don't have a budget for marketing and those kinds of things at all? And if not, where does that leave us? And number 2, is there an opportunity now to address Ms. DeWeese's concerns so that we can clear those issues up?
Yes, sir. I think the issue is, I agree with you 100%. No use holding up the budget just because of one contract in the city, but yet we still need to address the concerns that Councilwoman DeWeese has. So, I mean, those concerns need to be articulated to the mayor's office, and then we can sit down and respond to those to her as any particular case that she has. But my clarification was just, it's not just one person, it's one person that oversees the main contract, but the individual expenditures. There's many people in the departments that oversees the expenditure of these funds. And before anything's expended from the city and a check is cut, that my staff reviews that. So I agree that I do believe that the budget could be approved with this in here, but yet her concerns still need to be addressed.
Because they are legitimate concerns, and as a responsible council member, certainly we need to know those kinds of things. All right, thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Dr. Pratt.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. First, on your question about the contract having already been signed, it was signed a while back, but I reviewed it and I spoke to people who know how to read contracts, and they explained that if we don't appropriate funds, the contract doesn't happen. There's no termination clause in there that, basically that's how these kind of contracts are entered. So it's been signed, but if we don't fund it, then we can't pay it. However, well, and I also will say that I agree with Councilwoman DeWeese about the oversight and the policy. What are we wanting to get out of this marketing contract? And I'm very concerned, having looked at what's been done. We got that one report recently, and so I went to one of those sites. There was a website that they had done like a blog that they had got a product placement with, and I went and they advertised, this blog talked about the Air Museum, the Historic District, the Lighthouse, and the beach. And I thought, why are we advertising for the county? And then I saw on their Twitter site there was this long exchange about which beach restaurant has the best oysters. And I thought, is this really what the taxpayers of Pensacola are wanting us to do? And I think I'm very concerned about it. I know we're going to have this discussion on Monday, and I'm going to raise a lot of questions on Monday. And we need to have some policy about how this contract should be used. Or how we want to market our city, and whether it is this contract or not. I am concerned, though, about removing this contract from the budget because we do know we have to advertise for the airport and the port, and I'm not sure how it works with the budget. But I think that it is conceivable that we could look at portions of that budget and cut partially, because we aren't voting on the money to Zimmerman tonight. We're voting on what's our city's priority on expenditures for marketing. And so do we believe that we want to spend that kind of money on marketing, or should we say we'd like to see this part of the marketing budget reduced? And I think that we could want that. And I was looking to a little bit more information about how that money's spent, who's doing what, so that we could have a clear direction on what part of this budget on marketing is our goal as a city to spend that much money of taxpayer dollars on marketing, particularly when it's marketing places that aren't even part of the city. And so I think that's our job tonight and at our next hearing. And so I sympathize with the motion. I am in agreement, but I think it might be a little drastic for what we need to be doing at this point in our budget process. Thank you.
What are you suggesting, that we trim it down now, or we approve it and then at a later date that have some policy as how it's being addressed?
If somebody has some numbers about how to trim it down and a rationale, I could possibly support it. I need to go back and look at it, but I think that there are multiple parts, and as Mr. Barker said, this budget is a fluid document, and so maybe on our meeting on Monday, as we discuss this and learn more about what this plan is and what we want our policy to be, we might decide to trim it at that point. So, thank you.
Councilwoman Myers?
Yes, I too have a lot of concerns about this Zimmerman contract. And I would like to see a discussion about this at the Committee of the Whole on Monday, next Monday, and also that the Economic Development Incentive Fund be placed on the Committee of the Whole for discussion. And by that time, hopefully, Mr. Barker can provide us with information regarding what the mayor's intent is and in terms of using this. You said you've looked at other cities. So hopefully we can have that information by Monday so that we can discuss this on Monday at the Committee of the Whole and establish some policies on how this money is to be spent and the accountability. And the same thing with the Zimmerman contract. I would like to see that as a discussion item at the Committee of the Whole, because obviously we can't put this off until the next, or we shouldn't put it off until the next budget hearing. Hopefully we can resolve this at the Committee of the Whole and move forward at the next budget hearing with some resolution on this.
Thank you.
Mr. Vice President.
Councilwoman DeWeese.
I'm going to withdraw my motion in case we cannot resolve this on next Monday, that I will reserve that motion for the second hearing if need be. So as long as that's on the agenda and agreed upon, I withdraw.
Thank you. Mr. Barker.
Yes, sir, Mr. Vice President. Before we leave this topic in total, there was a request by Mr. Weiss to have Ms. Crawford put something on the record as it relates to the Air carrier landing fees, and if Melinda could come forward at this time.
Okay, thank you.
Members of council. The airport operates under our scheduled airline operating agreement, which basically allows that landing fees would compensate for any deficiencies in revenue. What was presented to council as part of this budget is the worst-case scenario. It is in all likelihood, in fact, we've already taken measures working with the airlines to accommodate them to reduce the landing fees. We have every intention of making sure that we remain competitive with the other airports. The issue of the bond rating agencies, there were several factors in there when our first downgrade came into effect. In fact, they were looking at the possible impact of Panama City's new international airport on our airport. At that time, and since then, we've proved that that's not an issue. There were issues with the aviation industry in total. After 2008, the airlines cut seat capacity. Pensacola was one of the airports that, as long with every other airport across the country, because the airlines were funneling seats back through their hubs. So they reduced our non-stops. We've actually been able to recoup more nonstop service than virtually any other airport along the Gulf Coast and in our region. We're very mindful of it, and we have every intention of making sure that we stay in compliance with the bond rating agency's concerns and also with our airline agreements.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Barker.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vice
Thank you.
President.
Councilman Gerald.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President, and I'd like to make these comments at this time. And as a former educator, as I listen to the concerns that are being raised by members of council, it lets me know that you guys, as a group, we've really done our homework. We've looked at what's going on, and there are some legitimate questions being raised, and Mr. Barker is promising to bring forth legitimate responses. But when I look at our neighboring city in Mobile, Alabama, and that council is facing a deficit, we are not. They're looking at ways to find those dollars, and I believe it was a week, maybe a week and a half ago, when they had on the table before them a reconsideration of hanging on to the 1-cent sales tax. Last week it was voted down. If they don't find the dollars, they're facing cuts and layoffs. We're not. And when you look at the budget in its entirety, if there are no gaps or shortfalls, we might be on the right track to move forward. And when you look at it and you look at and compare what they're doing or what they have to do and what we have to do, it's a kind of a comfortable seat for me to be in the position that we're in. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you. Comments from the public? Please vote.
I think it's stuck. My button's stuck. Is it?
No, it's on.
It passes 5-2. Okay. Item number 3, resolution number 3612. Madam Clerk?
Item 3 is resolution number 36-12, a resolution to be entitled, a resolution adopting a tentative budget for the city of Pensacola downtown improvement board for the fiscal year beginning October 1, 2012, providing an effective date.
Move the approval?
Second.
I've moved in second. Council? Councilwoman DeWeese?
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. And I do have some questions, as I had stated earlier, on the budget for this. We didn't have a chance to discuss this at our briefings, and I just would like to ask a few questions of someone on staff, if there is someone.
Yes, please.
From the DIB.
Mr. President, I don't see anyone from the DIB here in the audience, but if you would put those questions on the record, or if you want to send those to me,
I'll just state them.
I'll have the answers by the second public hearing.
Okay. My concerns, and I think we talked about this with last year's. The DIB pays about $21,000, a little more than that, in rent at the Rhodes Building, and I didn't know if we had looked at space at City Hall or space within a city, facility that they may be able to operate from. to save that expense. And I asked this on virtually every department for professional services. I would like an explanation of the professional services for $106,506. And then also on the revenues, and then a offsetting expense of the exact same amount, the $160,500. It says interlocal, and then it says an expense. Is that just a surplus fund, or what? How is that actually expended? And then as well, there is one entry as an expense of office overhead for $89,500. And then it's shown as revenue for a parking management reimbursement. Again, I just would like an explanation for the citizens on why those dollars are being moved like that. And there's also some parking debt service. I would like to know what that debt service is actually paying for.
And as I stated, I'll be glad to remit those questions to the DIB and have them here so it'll be on public record at the next public
Could we
hearing.
get that by the committee of the whole?
So I will withhold my approval today just because I have those questions that I need answered.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you. Comments from the audience? Please vote. What is that?
It fails on a vote of 4-3.
It requires 5 votes,
Yes.
so that didn't pass. Mr. Walker and then Mr. Spencer.
Yes, sir. If the vote stands as is, we need to continue this public hearing. According to the trim rules, it just stops at this point, and we won't approve anything else, and we'll continue the budget hearing to another time. I'd have to defer to the attorney, but I assume if someone on the prevailing side wanted to change their vote, then I would have those answers to those questions if that's why people voted no for it. At the next public hearing, another vote could be taken, it's my understanding, and we could proceed with this. Otherwise, we need to just continue this to next Wednesday, reschedule the second public hearing, and have that at a later time.
So you understand that because if that did not pass, we will have to discontinue. We will not go to the next item. We will discontinue and until the next public hearing. Mr. Attorney?
It would be a continuation of this public hearing till next time.
Let me get my brief sheet here. Go ahead on, Mr. Attorney, did you have something to say?
Not really, I just perching here. See if anyone had a question? I'm good. Great, thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. What I was going to say is this. I think what Mr. Barker was transmitting was that you could move to reconsider this vote if you so chose to do so, and we could proceed with the remainder of the business. And if there's no will to reconsider it, obviously we move on to the next hearing. But I think he was extending the opportunity for someone to make a motion to reconsider the vote.
Yeah, thank you. If the resolution does not pass with the 5 votes, we can have reconsideration from a person on the prevailing side. And then in terms of going again, if not, we will have to just entertain this at the next and continuation. Councilman Spencer.
Thank you. I was not aware that this would abruptly end our public hearing, so I can't say that when I pressed the to speak button that I was speaking in any manner to appeal for a reconsideration. But instead, I wanted to make sure that administration, and I just wanted to state that I wish Kim Kimbrough, our executive director, was here, and I hope that what we'll find out is that he was not, somehow was not tracking what was happening today at this time. I feel like Councilwoman DeWeese's questions, all of her questions are valid ones, and it would have been an opportune time for someone like our executive director to be here to immediately respond and fill in the blanks that our fellow council member has expressed. So it's unfortunate that he's not here, and I certainly hope that this won't happen again.
Councilman Geralds.
Yes, and thank you, Mr. Vice President. And I'm sitting here thinking, and I was thinking exactly the same thing that Mr. Spencer was articulating. However, I do believe that this ought to be a lesson in life, that knowing the importance of what we're talking about, they had a responsibility to be here. And it's their own fault for not being here. But I do wish that one of you on the prevailing side will make a motion to reconsider so that we can proceed.
It's one of us.
It's one of us. Well, in that case, I make a motion that, I was looking at the 3-4 vote, and, well, in that case, I make the motion that we move forward and take care of the other 2 items that are on this agenda.
Mr. President, you cannot move to the other items until you reconsider this, if you want to reconsider this item.
Let's make sure you understand what you're saying. The prevailing party is all those folks who voted no.
And that was the 3-4.
I think you have a motion, and I didn't hear a second, but the only way we can go to, okay, we did get a second.
What?
But the motion needs to be to reconsider.
That's what the motion will be, to reconsider.
Okay, and did I hear a second?
Second.
Okay, your lightest, do you want to make a comment, Councilwoman Louise?
I've talked enough tonight, thank you.
Councilwoman Myers?
Well, I'm on the prevailing side, and I support the motion because I want us to go ahead and get through this, and I didn't realize that it was going to gum up the work, so to
Please forgive me for not articulating that.
Okay.
You know the motion, all in favor?
No,
That's a motion to reconsider, right?
Yes, it's a motion to reconsider.
To reconsider.
reconsider.
Okay, now we need to go back and discuss that item and have a motion on that item, or any other comments regarding that item? Councilwoman,
I would just like to officially request that a representative from the DIB be present at our Monday meeting to discuss this, be added to the agenda, and along with the questions being answered. We've been asked to approve something with no explanation, and that's just not acceptable. We represent the citizens, and ultimately it's them that's being disrespected here today, not us. Thank you.
thank you. Please vote.
If you're voting on the resolution, you'll
Yes.
need to give the public the chance to speak again.
Did I not do that?
I didn't hear it.
Yes, but I'll definitely, so, public, any comments from the public? Please vote.
Mr. Vice President, we need a motion.
Okay, could I have a motion,
So moved.
Second.
comments from the public? Please vote.
Mr. Gerald.
It passes unanimously. Okay, item number 43712, is that correct?
Item number 4 is resolution number 37-12, a resolution to be entitled, a resolution adopting a budget for the City of Pensacola Community Redevelopment Agency for the fiscal year beginning October 1, 2012, providing an effective date.
The approval.
Second.
Properly moved in second. Comments from the council? Councilwoman Myers?
Yes, I wanted to ask Mr. Barker, I noticed under personal services that personal services has gone down $127,700 from 2012. In 2012, it was $336,600. Do you know why that line item has gone down that much?
I'll let, if I could, Councilwoman Yvette respond to that. That would be okay.
It's mainly due to the reorganization that they had, and with the former community development director, part of his salary as far as there, he was over because he was CRA administrator. And since that's changed, that's why it's gone down.
Okay, thank you.
Is that it? Comments from the public? Please vote. Passes unanimously. Item number 5.
Item 5 is resolution number 38-12, a resolution to be entitled, a resolution adopting a budget for the City of Pensacola East Side Tax Increment Financing District for the fiscal year beginning October 1, 2012, providing an effective date.
Move your approval.
Second.
Comments from the council? Public? This is Mac.
Vice President, council members. I want to bring something to your attention, and I do regret that I did not come upon this like in time previous to this, but on the revenues for the east side too. As you see, they are down to $68,100 this year. What I would like this council to be aware of, that based on the enabling ordinance for this trust fund, that represents only 95% of the actual collections. In other words, by ordinance, the city is allowed to skim off 5% of what is actually collected. Now, that in this particular fiscal year amounts to about $4,000. And my plea to you all is to consider the fact that in relation to the big City of Pensacola budget, $4,000 is a drop in the bucket. For the east side TIF, it will accomplish more. The valuation of the property in the east side TIF for the next fiscal year is down over $3 million. And to me, it's almost like being penny wise and pound foolish, taking that $4,000 that you're allowed to put into the general fund, where $4,000 could accomplish something more in the east side TIF, in other words, add to the $68,000, that would help you build the valuation of that property so that then your tax base would be more. So I simply want you to be aware that there's nothing, it's all allowed by the ordinance. You can take that 5%, but it certainly makes more sense to put that $4,000 back. And I'm not suggesting that you do any amending now. You can do amending resolutions in the new fiscal year, but I just want you to be aware of that and consider what that additional $4,000 could do for the East Side TIF. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Mack. Mr. Barker.
Yes, sir, Mr. President, I just want to tell Ms. Mack that, of course, as you've mentioned, that is by ordinance that we're doing that. And the premise for that, I think, first is people can pay early and get a 4% discount, so the city may or may not grossly receive that amount of money as it comes in. But what does come in, they do get 95% of it based on the value. If everyone took the discount, then that's what it is. But certainly, as a separate resolution or sometime, if the council wanted to give additional money to this fund, they could appropriate those dollars and put in there. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks for bringing that out. And of course, council, that's something that you very well can discuss at a later date. Please vote. That concludes it.
Yes.
Okay, that concludes the items on the agenda, and since this is a public hearing on the budget, we don't have any other business to discuss at this meeting. Thank you so very much.